He was 18 years old, just released from juvie with $20 in his pocket. What he didn't know was that a forgotten will from his grandfather was about to hand him 200 acres of land, a debt he couldn't pay, and a secret that would force him to choose between a fortune and his family's honor. If you've ever felt like your story was already written for you, stick around. We're about to talk about second chances, and if you believe in them, maybe hit that subscribe button, because that's what we're all about here. The gate slid open with a sound like grinding teeth. It was a noise I'd heard every day for 2 years, but this time it was opening for me to walk out. Not into a concrete yard. The air tasted different. It was thick with the exhaust of a passing truck, but underneath that it was just air. Free. I clutched the thin manila envelope in my hand. Inside was my release paperwork and a single, crisp $20 bill. My entire net worth. 2 years of my life, from 16 to 18, boiled down to the price of a bus ticket to nowhere and a cheap meal. The guard, a man named Miller with a face like worn leather, didn't say a word. He just nodded once, his eyes empty of pity or congratulations. To him, I was just another file being closed, another bed freed up. I stood on the curb, the sun feeling too bright, the world feeling too loud. Cars rushed past, people inside them living lives I couldn't even imagine anymore. They were going to jobs, to families, to homes. I was going to a bus stop. That was the only plan. My probation officer had given me the address of a halfway house in the city, a place where I could trade 6 months of my freedom for a cot in a room with 3 other guys who were all trying not to look back. It felt less like a step forward and more like a different kind of cage. The $20 bill felt heavy and useless in my pocket. It wasn't a start, it was an insult. A reminder of how little I had, how little I was. I walked the 4 blocks to the bus station, my state-issued jeans stiff and unfamiliar, my worn-out sneakers slapping against the pavement. Every person I passed seemed to stare, and I felt the phantom weight of the institution on my shoulders, a brand that wasn't visible but felt like it was burning on my skin. I bought a ticket for the city, the machine eating half of my $20 like it was nothing. $10.35 left. I sat on a hard plastic bench and waited, the minutes stretching into an eternity. For 2 years, my time had been measured by bells and head counts. Now, it was just empty space, and I had no idea how to fill it. The bus ride was a blur of smudged windows and anonymous towns. I watched fields and forests roll by, places with space and quiet, and felt a pang of something I couldn't name. It was the opposite of the life I'd known, the one I was heading back to. The city was a concrete maze, a place where you could be surrounded by millions of people and be completely, utterly alone. It was where everything went wrong. It was where I lost my grandfather, the only person who ever saw anything in me worth saving. He'd died a year into my sentence. A heart attack, the social worker had told me in a sterile, white-walled office. "Quick," she'd said, as if that was supposed to be a comfort. All it meant was that I never got to say goodbye. I never got to apologize. When I finally arrived at the probation office, the air was stale with the smell of cheap coffee and desperation. My P.O., a tired-looking man named Mr. Davies, flipped through my file without making eye contact. He recited the rules: curfew, mandatory job searches, weekly check-ins. It was a script he'd performed 1,000 times. I just nodded, my voice stuck in my throat. Then he paused, looking at a note stapled to the inside of my folder. "There's something else," he said, his brow furrowed. "A Ms. Anya Sharma has been trying to contact you, a lawyer. Said it's about your grandfather's estate." Estate? The word sounded ridiculous. My grandfather, Thomas, was a mechanic. He lived in a small rented apartment above a garage. His most valuable possessions were a set of worn-out wrenches and a collection of old vinyl records. An estate was for rich people. "You sure it's for me?" I asked, my voice raspy. Mr. Davies shrugged. "That's what she said. Leo Vance, grandson of Thomas Vance. She left her card." He slid a small, cream-colored business card across the desk. "Anya Sharma, attorney at law." There was an address on the other side of town. "She said it was important, something about a will." A will? The idea was even more absurd. What could he possibly have left me? His record player, a box of old photos. A part of me didn't want to know. It felt like opening a door to a past that was already nailed shut. But the alternative was the halfway house, a future that felt as bleak and predetermined as the past. That little business card was the only thing in my life that wasn't part of the system. It was a deviation, a question mark. I looked at the $10 in my hand. It wasn't enough for a cab, but it was enough for another bus ride. "Okay," I said, surprising myself. "I'll go see her." Ms. Sharma's office was in a part of the city I'd never seen before. The buildings were old brick with tall windows, and the people walking on the streets wore suits. It felt like a different planet. Her office was on the 3rd floor, a quiet sunlit room that smelled of old books and lemon polish. She wasn't what I expected. She was a young woman, maybe in her early 30s, with kind, intelligent eyes and a calm demeanor that immediately put me at ease. She didn't look at me like I was a case file. She looked at me like I was a person. "Leo," she said, gesturing to a comfortable chair opposite her desk. "I'm so glad you came. I'm sorry about your grandfather. I only met him a few times, but he was a good man." I just nodded, unsure what to say. "Mr. Davies said you had a will?" "Yes," she said, pulling a thick, official-looking document from a drawer. "Thomas came to me a few months before he passed. He wanted to make sure everything was in order." She slid the document across the desk. My name was typed on the front. The last will and testament of Thomas Vance. "He didn't have much in the way of savings," she continued gently. "There was a small bank account which, unfortunately, was depleted by his final medical expenses. He left you his personal effects, photographs, records, things of that nature, there in storage." I felt a familiar wave of disappointment, but I pushed it down. It was what I expected. Then she said the words that changed everything. "But that's not the main asset. Leo, your grandfather owned property, a significant amount of it." I stared at her. "Property? What property? He lived in a rented apartment." She smiled faintly. "It wasn't here in the city. It's a rural property, upstate, a farm. It was in his family for generations. He inherited it from his own father, but never lived there himself. He never sold it." She paused, letting the information sink in. "According to the deed, it's just over 200 acres. 200 acres. The number didn't compute. It was an abstraction, a movie concept. I grew up in a world measured in square feet, the size of a room, the size of a cell. I couldn't picture 200 acres. And he left it to me? He left it all to you," she confirmed. "The land, the farmhouse, everything on it. As of the reading of this will, you are the sole owner." I felt a dizzying sense of vertigo, as if the floor had dropped out from under me. Me, the kid who just walked out of juvie with $20, the owner of a farm. It was a joke, a mistake. "Why?" I finally managed to whisper. "Why would he leave it to me? He knew. He knew what I did." Ms. Sharma's expression softened with empathy. "He knew you were having a difficult time, Leo. But he believed in you. He told me he wanted you to have a place to land. A place to start over, away from all of this. a place to start over. The words echoed in the quiet room. It was the one thing I wanted more than anything, the one thing I thought I could never have. But a new thought, cold and sharp, cut through the haze. "What's the catch?" Ms. Sharma's professional calm returned. She folded her hands on the desk. "There are complications. The property hasn't been actively maintained in decades. The farmhouse is likely in disrepair, and more pressingly, there are significant property taxes in arrears. Your grandfather was paying them, but he fell behind in his last year. The amount owed is substantial." "How substantial?" I asked, my heart sinking. "A little over $12,000. $12,000. She might as well have said 12 million. I had $10.35. I laughed, a short, bitter sound. "So I own a 200-acre ghost story with a bill I can never pay. That's about right." "Not necessarily," she said, her tone steady. "The land itself is valuable. Very valuable, in fact. There's already been an inquiry from a development corporation, Titan Holdings. They've been trying to acquire land in that area for years. They would almost certainly be willing to purchase it from you. Their offer would cover the back taxes and leave you with a substantial amount of money, enough to truly start over. A new apartment, a car, education, whatever you want. The offer hung in the air, glittering and impossibly easy. Sell the land I'd never seen, pay the debt, walk away with a fortune. It was the smart move, the logical move. It was a clean break. But then I thought of my grandfather. He hadn't kept that land for 50 years just so I could sell it to the first bidder, a place to land. That's what he'd wanted for me, not a payout, a home, a chance. I looked at Ms. Sharma. "Is there another option?" "There is always another option," she said carefully. "But it would be difficult. You would have to find a way to pay the taxes before the county seizes the property and puts it up for auction. You'd have about 90 days. 90 days, 3 months to come up with $12,000. It was impossible. But the word impossible had been my entire life for 2 years. I was tired of it. "I want to see it," I said, the words coming out with more force than I expected. "Before I decide anything, I want to see the place." Anya Sharma studied my face for a long moment, a flicker of something, approval, perhaps, in her eyes. "I thought you might say that," she said. She reached into her drawer again and pulled out a large worn key attached to a simple brass tag. The number 142 was stamped into it. "Your grandfather left this with me. It's for the front door." She also handed me a bus ticket. "This will get you to a town called Havenwood. The farm is about 5 miles outside of town. From there, you're on your own." She stood up, extending her hand. "Call me when you get there, and Leo, be careful. A place that's been empty for a long time can hold more than just dust." The bus ride upstate was even longer than the one into the city. This time, I wasn't just running from something. I was running toward something, though I had no idea what it was. With every mile that passed, the concrete jungle gave way to rolling hills and dense forests. The air coming through the cracked window of the bus began to smell of pine and damp earth. I clutched the old brass key in my pocket, its edges worn smooth. It felt like the only real thing in the world. I thought about my grandfather, trying to square the man I knew, a quiet, grease-stained mechanic who smelled of oil and coffee, with the idea of him being a landowner, a man who held on to 200 acres of his family's history. He'd never once mentioned it. We talked about cars, about music, about the stupid mistakes I was making, but never about a farm. Why did he keep it a secret? The bus finally pulled into Havenwood. It was less a town and more a single street with a gas station, a general store, a diner, and a few houses. The silence was deafening after the constant roar of the city. I stepped off the bus and the driver just grunted and pulled away, leaving me in a cloud of diesel fumes. I was alone. There were no taxis, no Ubers, just a payphone that looked like it hadn't worked since the 90s. 5 miles. I checked the sun's position in the sky. It was early afternoon. I could walk it. I bought a bottle of water and a bag of chips at the general store, my first purchase as a free man, and asked the woman behind the counter for directions to the old Vance place. Her eyes widened slightly. Thomas Vance's place? Honey, no one's been out there in years. You're his family? His grandson, I said. She gave me a sympathetic look. Well, it's straight down this road, past the old bridge, can't miss it. Big, overgrown plot on your left. The house is set way back from the road. The walk was long and hot. The asphalt shimmered in the heat, and the woods on either side of the road buzzed with the sound of insects. I didn't see another car for over an hour. It was a kind of isolation I hadn't experienced even in solitary. This was a deeper quiet, a loneliness that felt ancient. Finally, I saw it. A rusted, leaning mailbox with the name Vance barely visible beneath the rust. Behind it, a dirt driveway, almost completely reclaimed by weeds, disappeared into a wall of trees. This was it. I pushed my way through the overgrown brush. The driveway was a tunnel of green, branches clawing at my clothes. After a few hundred yards, the trees opened up into a clearing, and I saw the house. It took my breath away. It wasn't just in disrepair, it was being swallowed. Ivy climbed up the walls, covering one side almost completely. The paint had peeled away to bare, silvered wood. The porch roof sagged dangerously in the middle, and several windows were boarded up. It looked haunted, but it was also beautiful. It stood there, defiant against the years of neglect, a skeleton of something that had once been strong and proud. It was surrounded by an ocean of tall grass that swayed in the breeze, stretching out to a line of distant trees. 200 acres. My land. My heart was pounding as I walked up the creaking steps of the porch. I avoided the sagging part, my footsteps echoing in the profound silence. The front door was a faded blue, a hornet's nest tucked into the corner of the frame. I pulled out the key. It felt impossibly small against the heavy ancient door. I slid it into the lock. It was stiff with rust and disuse. For a moment, I thought it wouldn't turn. I put my shoulder into it, twisting the key with all my strength. There was a loud, grating click that sounded like a bone breaking. The lock had turned. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open. It swung inward on a single, groaning hinge, opening a dark mouth into the past. The air that rushed out was thick and heavy, the smell of trapped time, dust, decaying paper, dry rot, and something else. Something faintly sweet, like dried flowers. Sunlight struggled to pierce the grime on the windows, cutting through the gloom in hazy golden shafts filled with dancing dust motes. The front room was a landscape of shapes under white sheets, ghosts of furniture. A sofa, a few armchairs, a tall grandfather clock standing silent in the corner, its pendulum still. I stepped inside, the door closing behind me with a soft thud, and the silence of the house enveloped me. I was home. I spent the rest of the day just walking through the downstairs rooms, my sneakers leaving clean prints in the thick layer of dust on the floorboards. Everything was preserved, a perfect time capsule. In the living room, I lifted a corner of a sheet to find a worn, floral-patterned sofa. In the dining room, a heavy oak table was surrounded by 6 chairs, all waiting for a family that would never gather again. The kitchen was the most lived-in space. There was a cast-iron stove, a deep farmhouse sink, and yellowed linoleum on the floor. A calendar was still hanging on the wall, frozen on July 1972. It felt like I was walking through someone else's memories, my family's memories. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just trying to absorb the reality of the place. But as I opened a sticky drawer next to the sink, my fingers brushed against a stack of papers. Most of it was old receipts and expired coupons, but at the very bottom was a thick, yellowed envelope. There was no address, no stamp, just my name, Leo, written on the front in my grandfather's familiar, spidery handwriting. My breath caught in my throat. It was a letter. From him. It had to have been waiting here for years, written long before I got into trouble, long before he died. My hands trembled as I carefully tore it open. The paper was brittle, and the ink had faded slightly, but the words were clear. "My dearest Leo," it began, "if you are reading this, it means I am gone, and you've found your way home. I hope you are not angry with me for keeping this place a secret. I feared that if I told you about it, it would become just another asset, another number on a page. I wanted it to be a discovery, a new beginning when you needed it most." I had to sit down. I sank onto a dusty kitchen chair, my eyes scanning the page. This land, Leo, it is more than just dirt and trees. It is our history. It is where our family put down roots when they had nothing else. It is a place of resilience. I know you have that same resilience in you, even if you don't see it right now. I know you've made mistakes, we all do. I made one myself, a long time ago, one that has cast a long shadow over this place. But this farm, this is your chance to make things right. Not just for yourself, but for me too. He went on to explain about the taxes. He knew they would be a burden. He apologized for leaving me with such a problem. "I ran out of time, son," he wrote. "I always thought I'd have more time to sort things out. But life doesn't always work that way. The money to save this place is here. You just have to find it. Look for it where the heart of the house is. It was always the heart of the house for your grandmother." The letter ended with a line that hit me like a punch to the gut. "Don't sell this land, Leo, not for any price. It is your inheritance, but it is also a promise. Protect it. It will protect you in return. With all my love, Grandpa Thomas." I read the letter 3 times, the brittle paper shaking in my hands. The grief I had suppressed for a year came rushing in, a raw, overwhelming wave. He hadn't given up on me. Even when I was at my worst, even when I had given up on myself, he had believed in me. He had planned this. He had left me a home, a challenge, and a final declaration of his faith in me. But it was all tangled up in a riddle. The heart of the house. What did that even mean? And what was this mistake he'd made? The $12,000 debt felt heavier than ever, but now it was attached to a promise. Selling felt like a betrayal. Keeping it felt impossible. I sat there in the dusty, silent kitchen, a letter from a ghost in my hand, and cried for the first time in 2 years. I cried for my grandfather. I cried for the kid I used to be. And I cried because for the first time, I felt a flicker of something I had long thought was dead and buried. Hope. Listen, if you've ever been handed a responsibility that felt way too big for you, if you've ever felt the weight of someone's expectations pressing down on you when you could barely stand on your own, you know that feeling. That crushing weight of not wanting to let someone down, especially someone who isn't here to see you try. It's a heavy, heavy thing. I was just a kid, an ex-con with nothing to my name but a ghost's promise and a mountain of debt. It felt like I was being asked to build a new life with broken tools. Maybe you've felt that way too. We're going to get back to the story, but I just want you to hold that thought, the weight of a promise. Because what I found next wasn't just about money or land. It was about the real cost of keeping a promise like that. Now, let's get back to that dusty farmhouse. The sun was setting, painting the dirty windows in shades of orange and purple. The house grew darker, the shadows stretching into long, menacing fingers. I had no electricity, no running water, and a single bottle of water to my name. I spent my first night as a landowner sleeping on the floor of the living room, wrapped in one of the dusty sheets from the furniture, my head pillowed on my jacket. Sleep didn't come easy. Every creak of the old house, every rustle of wind in the ivy outside sounded like a footstep. My grandfather's words echoed in my mind, the heart of the house. The next morning, I woke up stiff and cold, but with a renewed sense of purpose. I had to find that money. It was a treasure hunt, a final game left for me by my grandfather. I started with the most obvious place, the fireplace. It was the centerpiece of the living room, a massive stone hearth that was easily the most solid-looking thing in the entire house. It felt like a heart. I ran my hands over every stone, tapping and listening for a hollow sound. I checked the mantelpiece, looking for hidden compartments. I even swept out the old ashes, my hands turning black with soot, hoping to find a loose brick or a hidden cavity. Nothing. For the next 2 days, I searched the house from top to bottom. I looked in the grandfather clock, behind old paintings, under loose floorboards. I tapped walls, emptied drawers, and sifted through boxes of yellowed papers in the attic. The house slowly gave up its smaller secrets. A box of my grandmother's recipes, a collection of my father's report cards from elementary school, a faded photograph of my grandfather as a young man in a soldier's uniform. I was finding my family's history, piece by piece, but I wasn't finding the money. With each passing day, the 90-day deadline felt shorter, the $12,000 figure looming larger. Desperation began to set in. Maybe I had misunderstood. Maybe the money was long gone. Maybe the whole thing was a fantasy, and my only real option was to call Ms. Sharma and sell. I was in the living room, staring at the fireplace again, feeling defeated. My grandmother. The clue was about her. It was always the heart of the house for your grandmother. What would that mean to her? I tried to remember the few stories my grandfather had told me about her. She loved to read, she loved music, and she loved this house, even though she'd never gotten to live in it. He said she used to sit by the fire, planning all the things she would do with it one day. My eyes scanned the hearth again, and this time I saw it. It wasn't one of the big stones of the fireplace itself. It was a single, small, reddish brick set into the wall just beside the mantel, at eye level. It was a slightly different color from the others, a detail I had overlooked a dozen times. My heart hammered against my ribs. I scrambled over, my fingers tracing the edges of the brick. It was loose. I could feel it shift slightly under my touch. I used the end of an old fire poker to carefully pry it out. Behind it was a dark, hollow space. Reaching inside, my fingers closed around something cold and hard. A small, black metal box, heavy for its size. I pulled it out into the light. It was an old cash box, and it was locked. There was no key. For a frantic hour, I tried to pick the lock with a piece of wire, but it was no use. Finally, fueled by a surge of adrenaline and frustration, I took the box out to the dilapidated barn, found a heavy sledgehammer, and brought it down on the lock with all my strength. The metal shrieked and bent, and the lid popped open. I knelt in the dirt, my breath held tight in my chest, and looked inside. There was no cash. My stomach plummeted. For a second, I thought it was empty, but then I saw two things nestled at the bottom. The first was another sealed envelope, this one thicker than the last. The second was a folded, brittle document tied with a faded red ribbon. A property deed. I picked up the letter first. My name was on it again in that same familiar script. I opened it with a growing sense of dread. Leo, the second letter began. If you've found this, then you are more persistent than I even hoped. I am sorry for this game of hide-and-seek, but some truths are too heavy to be left out in the open. You need to understand what you are truly fighting for. Now it is time to tell you about my mistake. The letter was a confession. Decades ago, when my father was just a boy, he got sick. Very sick. The doctors didn't know what it was, and the medical bills piled up faster than my grandfather could pay them. He was a young man with no savings, and he was desperate. So he went to a local man, a wealthy landowner named Marcus Thorne, and asked for a loan. Thorne agreed, but the terms were predatory. The interest rate was astronomical, and the collateral he demanded was this farm. My grandfather, seeing no other choice, signed the papers. He saved his son, but he shackled the family land to a man he knew was a vulture. He spent the next 40 years paying off that debt, sending a check every single month, but with the ridiculous interest he barely made a dent in the principal. The debt was a generational curse. Marcus Thorne is gone now, the letter continued, but his son, Julian Thorne, runs the company. Titan Holdings. They are the ones who want to buy this land. They are not just interested, Leo, they are entitled. They have been waiting for me to die, waiting for the debt to default, so they can seize the property for pennies on the dollar, just as Marcus always intended. The $12,000 tax bill is their opening. If you can't pay it, the county will auction the land, and Julian Thorne will be the first and only bidder. Their recent offer to buy it from you is just a shortcut, a way to get it without a fight. I felt sick. The developer wasn't just some corporation. They were a predator that had been circling my family for 2 generations, and I was about to walk right into their trap. Then, my grandfather explained the second item in the box, the deed. But I was not a complete fool, Leo. When I signed that loan, I did something Marcus Thorne never noticed. The loan agreement was for the property listed as 142 Vance Road, which is the main parcel of 200 acres. But a year before that, I had the land resurveyed. There's a small 5-acre plot adjacent to our property, a piece everyone always considered worthless scrubland. I had it legally separated and registered under a different parcel number. The deed you are holding is for that 5-acre plot. It was never part of the collateral. It is free and clear. It is yours, unburdened. A 5-acre plot of worthless land. It seemed like a small, pathetic victory against such a powerful enemy. Why would he go to such trouble to save it? The letter didn't say. It ended with a warning. Julian Thorne is a patient man. He will try to charm you, or he will try to crush you. Do not trust him. The choice is yours, son. You can take their money, and I wouldn't blame you. It would set you up for life. Or you can fight. You can finish the battle I could not. The decision must be yours. I sat there in the dirt of the barn, the deed in one hand and the letter in the other, my world completely upended. The easy way out, selling the land, now felt like surrender. It meant letting Julian Thorne win. It meant my grandfather's lifelong struggle, his 40 years of payments would all be for nothing. But the other path, fighting? How? I had no money, no power, no resources. I was an 18-year-old kid against a multi-million-dollar corporation. It was a suicide mission. Just then, a buzzing sound vibrated in my pocket. It was a cheap flip phone Ms. Sharma had given me for emergencies. I answered, my voice hoarse. "Leo, it's Anya Sharma. I have news." Her voice was calm and professional, but I could hear an undercurrent of urgency. "I just received a formal offer from Titan Holdings. They faxed it over this morning. Leo, it's significant." "How significant?" I asked, my heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm. "They're offering $2 million, Leo. $2 million. It's an incredible offer, far above market value for undeveloped rural land. All you have to do is sign. The money would be in an escrow account within 48 hours. They would handle the back taxes, all of it. You would walk away a rich man. $2 million. The number was so large it felt unreal. It was a magic wand that could erase my past and build any future I wanted. It was freedom, safety, security. It was everything I had never had. All I had to do was give up a piece of land I'd only known for 3 days. Give up on a promise to a dead man. "Leo, are you there?" Ms. Sharma's voice broke through the static in my head. I looked from the letter in my hand to the dilapidated farmhouse visible through the barn door. I thought of my grandfather, spending his whole life sending checks to a man who was trying to steal his history. I thought of his words. Finish the battle I could not. This wasn't just about land anymore. It was about honor. It was about my family's name. It was about refusing to be the person who finally broke, the person who let the vulture win. "I'm not selling," I said, the words tasting like iron in my mouth. "Not yet." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Leo," Anya said, her voice softer now, "are you sure? This is a life-changing amount of money. You don't have to prove anything to anyone." "I have to prove it to myself," I said. "There's more going on here. I'm not signing anything." The consequence of that decision was immediate. The very next day, a courier delivered a thick envelope to the leaning mailbox at the end of the drive. It was a formal notice of tax delinquency from the county, with a bright red stamp on it. Final notice. The auction date was set. I had 67 days left. The pressure was no longer a distant threat, it was a ticking clock. The $2 million offer felt like a ghost, haunting me, whispering how easy it could all be. Some days the temptation was overwhelming. I was sleeping on the floor, eating canned food I bought with the last of my money from the bus ticket, and drinking water from a plastic jug. My life was hardscrabble and uncertain. Selling was the sane choice. But every time I thought about it, I saw my grandfather's handwriting. I felt the weight of that promise, and I couldn't do it. I became obsessed with the second letter. There had to be another clue, something I was missing. Why was that 5-acre plot of scrubland so important? Why would my grandfather go to such lengths to separate it and protect it? I reread the letter over and over until the paper was soft and worn at the creases. Nothing. It was a dead end. Desperate, I decided to walk the property line myself, to see this supposedly worthless piece of land with my own eyes. I found the old survey map in a desk drawer and set out, pushing my way through thorny bushes and thick undergrowth. It took me most of a day to trace the boundaries of the main 200 acres. The land was beautiful, rolling hills, dense woods, a small creek that cut through a meadow. It was a kingdom. Finally, I reached the edge of my property and crossed over into the 5-acre plot. It was exactly as I'd imagined, rocky, covered in scrub brush and stunted trees. It seemed useless for farming, useless for building. I walked its perimeter feeling a deep sense of confusion. Why did he save this? I was about to give up and head back to the house when I reread the letter one last time, standing there in the middle of that useless plot. One sentence stood out, a line I had skimmed over before. Marcus Thorne only ever saw the surface of things. He never understood that the real value isn't in what grows on the land, but what lies beneath it, protected by the oldest sentinel. The oldest sentinel. It was another riddle. I scanned the landscape. My eyes were drawn to the far edge of the 5-acre plot, where it met the 200-acre parcel. There, standing alone, was a tree. But it wasn't just any tree. It was a colossal oak, ancient and gnarled, its branches spreading wider than the farmhouse itself. It had to be hundreds of years old. It was, without a doubt, the oldest living thing for miles. The sentinel. I ran toward it, my heart pounding with a wild, electric hope. I circled its massive trunk, my hands running over the rough bark. It felt like I was touching history. Then I saw it. At the base of the tree, tucked in among the thick exposed roots, was a small, flat stone that didn't look like the others. It was too perfectly placed, too symmetrical. I dug my fingers into the damp earth around it and pulled. It was heavy, but it came loose. Underneath was a dark hole. My hands shaking, I reached inside and felt the familiar cold, hard shape of another metal box. This one was much larger and heavier than the first. It took all my strength to haul it out of the ground. Unlike the last one, this one wasn't locked. It was sealed with wax, but the lid was just held down by a simple latch. I flipped the latch, broke the wax seal, and lifted the lid. I stared, my mind unable to process what I was seeing. It was full of cash. Stacks and stacks of old bills, bundled together with rubber bands. It wasn't millions, but it looked like a fortune. And on top of the money was one final envelope. The last letter. With trembling hands, I opened it. Leo, it read. This is the last secret, and it is the most important. The money here is what I saved over 50 years, every spare dollar I ever made. It should be enough to pay the taxes and give you a little to live on while you get on your feet. But the money is not the real treasure. The real treasure is the reason I saved this piece of land. The letter went on to explain the truth. The 5-acre plot wasn't worthless scrub. It sat directly on top of a deep, natural aquifer. A geological survey my grandfather had secretly commissioned years ago confirmed it. And at one end of the plot, hidden by a thicket of bushes, was a natural spring. The water that came out of it was incredibly pure, filtered through hundreds of feet of granite. It had unique mineral rights associated with it. Rights that my grandfather had made sure were attached to the deed of the 5-acre plot, not the main farm. Julian Thorne knows about the water, Leo, the letter concluded. His company did their own surveys. That's what they're really after. They don't want to build condos, they want to build a bottling plant. They want to drain our spring and sell our water back to the world. The $2 million offer isn't for the land. It's a trick to get you to sign over both deeds without realizing the true value of what you have. The main farm is just the buffer zone they need. The spring is the gold mine. This is why you cannot sell. This water is a gift of the earth. It belongs to this place, not to a corporation. Your grandmother always said it was the lifeblood of the land, protected. That is my final request. That is your true inheritance. Everything clicked into place. The secrecy, the separate deed, the desperate warnings not to sell. My grandfather hadn't just been fighting a debt. He had been guarding a secret, protecting a resource. He had left me, not just a home, but a sacred duty. I walked through the brush and found the spring just where he said it would be. A small pool of crystal-clear water bubbled up from between two rocks, cool and pure. I knelt and drank from my hands. It was the best water I had ever tasted. In that moment, the choice became simple. There was no more temptation, no more doubt. The $2 million was poison. This water was life. My battle was clear. I took the box of money back to the house and counted it. It was just over $20,000. Enough to pay the taxes, buy a used truck, get the power and water turned on, and survive for a few months. It was seed money for a new life. The next day, I drove into Havenwood, a journey that felt worlds away from the walk I had made just weeks before. I went to the county tax office and paid the $12,000 bill in cash. The clerk looked at me like I was a ghost, then stamped the receipt with a satisfying thud. The land was safe. It was mine. My next call was to Anya Sharma. I told her everything about the letters, the debt, the separate deed, the spring, the water rights. She was silent for a long time on the other end of the line, and when she finally spoke, her voice was filled with a new kind of respect. "Leo," she said, "your grandfather was a brilliant man. He's given you all the leverage. Titan can't touch the water without that 5-acre deed, and you own it outright. They can't force you to sell." We talked for an hour, formulating a plan. It wasn't about fighting them head-on. It was about building something better. She suggested setting up a small local trust for the water rights, ensuring they could be used for the community, perhaps for local agriculture, but never exploited by a large corporation. It was a way to honor my grandfather's legacy permanently. The weeks that followed were the hardest and best of my life. I started the slow, back-breaking work of reclaiming the farm. I bought tools and lumber and began repairing the sagging porch. I tore out the rotten floorboards in the kitchen. I cleared the weeds from the driveway and planted a small garden. Every day was a struggle, but it was a struggle I had chosen. It was work that was building something, not just passing time. The locals in Havenwood, who had at first been wary of the strange kid who had taken over the old Vance place, started to warm up to me. The woman at the general store would save me day-old bread. The owner of the gas station, an old man named Gus, taught me how to fix the ancient tractor I found in the barn. I was no longer an outsider. I was becoming part of the place. I never heard from Titan Holdings directly, but one day, a sleek black car pulled up to the end of my newly cleared driveway. A man in an expensive suit got out and just stared at the house, at the new wood on the porch, at the smoke curling from the chimney. I knew it was Julian Thorne. I didn't go out. I just stood at the window and watched him. He stood there for a long time, then got back in his car and drove away. He knew he had lost. He knew the land was no longer for sale at any price. My life isn't perfect. The farmhouse is still a work in progress. The scars from my past haven't magically disappeared. Some nights, I still wake up thinking I hear the sound of a cell door slamming shut. But then I hear the wind in the old oak tree, or the creak of the house settling, and I remember where I am. I am home. I learned that inheritance isn't about what you're given, whether it's $20 or 200 acres. It's about what you choose to do with it. My grandfather didn't leave me land. He left me a choice. He left me a chance to become a man he could be proud of. He left me a purpose. And that's worth more than any amount of money. So, what did this story teach me about second chances? It taught me that they don't just appear. You have to build them. You have to fight for them. Sometimes you have to build them out of the wreckage of your past, with nothing but a promise and a little bit of hope. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening. This community is built for people who understand that the hardest choices are often the ones that define us. If my story resonated with you, if you've ever had to fight for your own second chance, I'd be honored if you'd subscribe. And I want you to tell me in the comments below, what's the most important thing you've ever inherited that had nothing to do with money? I'll be reading everyone. Because your story matters. You matter. And you're not alone.